All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Just a recap on housekeeping. Again, my name is Jamie Kaintz. I'm the Director of Student Services. I'm just going to do some housekeeping tips before we get started. While all of our guests are on listen-only mode, please use the Q&A function. I did earlier, if you were on earlier, I suggested the chat function. Use the Q&A function on your Zoom call to pose questions throughout the webinar. I'll try to stop every 15 minutes if there's questions, and then at the end, we are going to try to end around 6:45, but if there are questions, we have some flexibility that we can all stay on until about 7 o'clock. So welcome. Thank you for joining us this evening. I'm going to dive right in and start with introductions. So again, my name is Jamie. I'm the Director of Student Services. I am located in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. I am also a graduate student pursuing the Master of Science in Restorative Practices. I'm very honored to be joined tonight by two guests, Dawn Williams, who is also pursuing her degree, and Leonard Flippen, who I am very fortunate to be sharing a course with myself right now. So I'll stop talking for a moment, and I'd like to just open it up for introductions. So Dawn, would you like to start? Dawn, I think you're on mute.
And there I am.
And there you are.
I'm an assistant principal at a mid-sized pre-K through 8 school. We serve about 850 students. Our students tend to have backgrounds that have high ACEs scores. So we have a bit of trauma among our students, and so the work that I'm doing with IIRP has been very helpful in working with that population.
Thank you. Leonard?
Yes, so I am a restorative justice facilitator, and I am currently working at a middle school in Guadalupe, California. We just started our 3rd year there, and so it's been quite interesting. I also do circles in the juvenile hall, and I conduct restorative justice conferences for the juvenile justice system here in Santa Maria, California. And I also hold a weekly community circle that we do to the community every week. And as you say, I'm also pursuing a degree with IIRP.
Wow. Is that all both of you do?
Yeah, well, not quite, but I have an 18-year-old daughter, and the list goes on.
Sure. And, the dedication and the commitment that you both have. Dawn and I were speaking earlier about, the course load that she's taking, plus the work that she's doing. And Leonard, the work that you have is just remarkable, and you're both clearly very committed, and your schools and your communities are very fortunate to have both of you, as are we. So thank you again for joining us tonight. So we're going to dive in, and Dawn, you work in the school in New York. Tell me what your day looks like. What does your work entail?
I wear many hats throughout the day, but I don't really I don't have a traditional view of being an assistant principal. So my office is usually flooded with children and adults. I often, if there are students in crisis, I'm present for them. If there are students who just need a little extra attention, a little extra care, I'm present for them. My room is full all day, every day. I'm very fortunate. Right now I'm working specifically with grades 3 through 5, and our Girls Academy, which is grades 6, 7, and 8. So my days start, I'm usually out of bed by 4 a.m. and as soon as my feet hit the floor, I'm running the whole rest of the day.
Thank you. Very, very hectic day. Leonard, what about your day? What would a typical day look like for you?
So on the days that I'm at McKinsey, Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays, similar to Don, I usually, as soon as I set foot on campus, there's usually some restorative situation that has developed because I'm only there 3 days. Usually in the in-between days on Tuesday, it's Leonard, can you talk to this kid, or can we do a conference with this student? Or so it usually starts that way. I like to get that out of the way first. And then after that, it's pretty much, I hate to say it, but a lot of it is putting out fires. I work at a school that's 5 through 8, and it's in a lower economics area, so we have a lot of trauma. And the other side of it is helping teachers and the rest of the staff to get caught up. So I do a lot of, I guess, what we call mentoring, just kind of having people sit with me to watch me go through the process. I like to tell people I have the greatest job in the world because, I tell kids all the time, if you're talking to me, you're not in trouble. My job is to get you out of trouble. So I get to help people repair relationships and heal harms. And it usually ends, 99% of all the interactions usually end good in restorative practices. That's one of the things I love about it. And those that don't, we have a very clear reason why we weren't able to come to that kind of agreement. And then when I'm done with that, I usually have either a circle or some other engagement after school that I have to do. And then it's homework and discussion boards and PLGs and usually, I'm hitting the bed about 10 o'clock. So yeah, it's my life is pretty full of restorative practices.
Perfect. Thank you.
And then on the days that I'm not there, like for instance, today I have 2 restorative conferences that I'll be doing after this webinar. So.
Thank you. PLG, can you talk a little bit about that? Can you explain what that is? Because I'm guessing that all of our guests are not familiar with the PLG.
Okay, so PLG, I forget is it personal learning group is? Professional learning group?
Yep.
So PLG would be the electronic equivalent to a circle, I guess. And what happens is in the PLG, we share our learning in a discussion online, and then we ask for feedback from the rest of our colleagues. One of the things that makes it so special is that we all are kind of growing at the same speed, so we can kind of feed off of each other. One of the disadvantages of on being online to go to school is that we don't have that connection, and the PLG is very much that connection. I was thinking about it the other day, and there's a part of me that prefers it over just a circle, because it actually gives us a chance to reflect on what people are saying to us. I have it in writing, and I also have a chance to really kind of reflect on what my colleagues are actually going through. And ironically, I actually have a chance of watching their growth in a narrative form, so to speak. And if I don't know if is that common to every class at IIRP? I don't think it is it?
The discussion boards are. The PLG is pretty specific to in my experience, now mind you, I'm only in my 4th course myself, but from my experience, this is the first actual professional learning group that I've been as engaged in, but there's been different levels of engagement. Dawn, you've been in various classes and different classes from us. What has your experience been in the online engagement piece with other students, and what has your the learning experience look like for you?
In the PLG, one of the things that, like at the beginning of the course, I took the course that the 2 of you are taking. I took it last year or earlier this year. And one of the things that the professor really cautioned us about was being sure that we were challenging one another. So yes, we were to be supportive. Yes, we were to highlight and identify the areas in which our classmates were doing a good job, but we were also required to really push each other through the process so that we could optimize our growth. And that was that can be a little challenging when you when it's all online. But because we also have the Zoom classes, and the Zoom is like what we're doing today, since we meet together in the Zoom classes, we do have that opportunity to have FaceTime, so that we can really take on the importance. So it's not just my growth, it's not just my learning, but the learning of my classmates becomes as important to me as my own growth.
Thank you. So tell me, Dawn, when you're in those classes and you're learning and you're supporting your colleagues, how does that affect your work? What do you take from your classes into your work? Because students tell me all the time, I can use what I'm learning today, tomorrow in my classroom or in my organization. So what has that been like for you?
It's as if someone from IIRP is following me through my day and throwing interesting things into the coursework as I go along. It's amazing how things have come up, and then I have an assignment, and I immediately see how to respond to things that have come up. So, for instance, I have a student who is in the 3rd grade. Very challenging boy, on lots of different medications to manage his ability to learn, and then we have medications that are managing the managing. And one day I was interacting with him, and it didn't go well, in that he was very calm, very quiet, just openly admitted everything that he had done wrong. And so, okay, great. So I'm going to send you back to class. That weekend, I talked about the interaction in my Zoom in Dr. Rendell's class, and she was able to help me see how this young person was able to get out from under the harm he had caused to other people just by being extremely agreeable. That very next week, of course, because it hadn't been resolved so well that first time, he found himself in a similar situation. And this time, because I had been through the class, I knew exactly how to interact with him. I was astounded to see how it turned out. So I talked to him about the harm he caused. And when he tried to get out from under it and tried to deny it, tried to deflect, I used what I had learned in my class the week before. And when by the time we got to the end of the interaction, he was able to admit that he had created harm for another person. This was 1 week, and then the next week, and we have not returned to that particular situation since then, because he knows that now I know, and I know what I'm looking for, I know what I'm looking at, and I know how to interact with him when he is creating harm for other children. It was a thing to behold.
What a great example. And that must have felt wonderful for you, just being able to help him move through that.
And also that shift in mindset, that someone who doesn't wake up, most people don't wake up in the morning, and definitely most 3rd graders don't wake up in the morning and say, I'm going to look for all the people I want to harm. These things happen, and I have had to develop the mindset that my goal is to help him as well as the person who is harmed, but I want to help him have healthy, productive relationships. And this, it has changed my perception, because now it's not immediately, because everyone looks to the assistant principal, well, this child must be suspended. No, this child must be helped to move to the next level so that he can be in productive relationships every day.
And you're modeling a great leadership, and you're teaching other people just by osmosis and by them observing what you're doing and the results that you're seeing. So congratulations, it's wonderful work. Leonard, do you have anything to add or anything you'd like to share about how you're taking your coursework into your daily life and how that's having an impact on you?
Sure. First of all, Don, thank you for the great work that you're doing. I work very closely with vice principals and dean of students, and it's a tough position to be in. Yeah, it's hard to be punitive and restorative at the same time. So, it takes a lot of skill and work, and it's a lot of hard work. This particular course has been really impactful for me. I kind of came to IIRP backwards. A few years ago, I went out and just started doing a lot of restorative practice circles and conferences and things like that. So I have quite a few hours under my belt in actually doing restorative practices. So when I came to IIRP, I had a lot of what we call practical experience, and I began to put the academic, or I guess the frame around this experience that I've had. One of the things about action research is the job is to look at yourself. And what I have found is that, we talk about the social discipline window of, 2, 4, not, and with. And I had forgot that applies to me as well. And that a lot of I still brought a lot of the old paradigm with me into my restorative practices work, which I think is true for everybody. I mean, in order to actually I think restorative practice is something that we become slowly over maybe a lifetime. So what this has done for me is it's put me in a position to where I'm having to learn how to be with myself and my practice. And I don't know for anyone else at this point, but I don't think if it had not been for this class, I think I would still be out there being restorative with people by doing things to them and for them. As opposed to having to really take the time and look at how can I teach people about restorative practices while being with them, which is a struggle, because I found that this whole process is a process of discovery. I can't tell myself how to be with people. I just got to kind of go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth until all of a sudden I go, oh, wow, that feels good. And that's kind of the process that I'm in right now. That was a long answer to a short question.
I don't think there are any short answers to the work that we're doing. What I'm hearing is people before tasks, really, at the root of it. It's about the person and not about getting something done. And it's trial and error. And does this work? And try it. And if it doesn't work, then try something else without taking so much onto ourselves that we just shut down. Making ourselves a little bit vulnerable. I'm hearing that too, by trying different things and taking careful risks. We did get a question in from Glenn, and it leads to, Glenn, thank you for asking, because I was actually going to raise this. So the question is, how can you talk about the reactions of colleagues who are new to restorative practices? So you're working a lot with your students, but you both work with the adults in your organizations and in your schools. Leonard, I know you're doing work in the community as well. So modeling it is one thing, but how are you helping to support the adults that you're working with, both in and out of school, to understand? So Leonard, do you want to start? And then Dawn?
Okay. Very carefully. Restorative practices is a new paradigm. And one of the things about paradigms is you can only see the new paradigm from the old paradigm. In this situation, we're talking about a paradigm of hurt. We live in a world where we hurt each other. One of the first things that happens when you introduce restorative practices to people, or that I have to be mindful of, is that this information is going to hurt. It doesn't feel good. It's uncomfortable. For a lot of people, they need to just kind of back up in the beginning. And the reason being is that as you become more restorative, you start to see the reality of our situation, and it doesn't feel good. The other thing that I've learned about restorative practices is that it's an experiential process. Reading about restorative practices, talking about restorative practice, even taking these courses are helpful, but the real transformation happens when you actually engage in a restorative practice, circles, things like that. So what I have learned is to try and meet people where they're at in a restorative practice as much as possible, so that they can get a feel for what it means to be restorative. Because without actually experiencing it, they can't know. And also to accept the fact that the resistance, I like to call it pushback, and a lot of the confusion is part of the process. One of the first things I noticed was that as I became more restorative, I actually began to be also more confrontational with people who were still in the old paradigm, because I was thinking, man, can't you see this? And I've learned to become very compassionate with people that aren't restorative and don't see what I see, because it just doesn't go over very well. You know, one of the things I tell teachers when I first work with them is, you know, no one likes to be told that what they're doing doesn't work. But that's exactly what I'm going to tell you. So I try to tell them up front what's going to happen, so that it kind of eases the impact of it. Yeah, it's a process. And again, doing it with people. So yeah, I hope that helps.
Thank you, Leonard. Dawn, do you have anything to add to that?
I do. So in the last year and a half or so that I've been taking courses, I'd say that my empathy has grown for my colleagues, because I've been very frustrated at times with my colleagues when I see a lack of warmth and compassion for children, when we've been talking a lot about disproportionality, and there is in students who are referred to special education settings, but there's also the disproportionality in terms of suspensions. And so I have had a great deal of frustration for my colleagues as we talk about how many kids are being suspended, but we don't do something different when they find themselves in conflict. So when a student doesn't know how to do multiplication, we teach that. But when a student does not know how to have a conflict and be positive, we punish that. We don't teach to it, we punish to it. So I've been very frustrated over the last several years. And this coursework has led me to understand that I have to deal with my colleagues compassionately, because many of them just don't know what else to do. And so now that I'm developing this framework and this mindset in my own life, I can also see for myself that so often I have become quickly punitive because I didn't have, the world is, all I have is a hammer, so everything was a nail. And so either the student and I could work it out, or I immediately went to punitive because I didn't know what else to do. I didn't have anything else at my disposal. And so this has really required me to deal more empathically and more compassionately with my colleagues. The other thing Leonard alluded to, there is one of the great pressures in my particular position is the time pressure. They're always, according to National Staff Development Council, administrators, our average interaction with a person is 2.5 minutes. That's our average. And so in that 2.5 minutes that you're interacting with this many people throughout a day, there just does feel as if there's not enough time to stop and be restorative. And so I'm constantly trying to stop my mind from telling the lie that there's not enough time. Because when we are being restorative with other people, that time we buy actually the future when we take the moment now and interact with a person heart to heart, mind to mind. You get that time back on the other end, so just go ahead and spend it now. But it's a reflex, and that's so when I have a teacher that I supervise who's been struggling with two very difficult students in her classes. And one of the things that we do together is in my office on my conference table, I have a puzzle, and a giant puzzle, almost 1,000 pieces. And she comes in from time to time, and we can just sit together. And we're not talking about the kids, we're not talking about the difficulty, we're just spending time together, getting to know each other, which is at the foundations of capacity building. When you get to know someone and you know who they are and what they can do, you can help them grow in their area. So I want restorative practices to be developed to support children, but I absolutely must pour restorative practices into my teachers. They can't give away what they don't have. So if I pour it into them, they in turn can share it with their children. And then I go back to my classes and my professors pour it into me. And it just keeps going around and around and around.
It's the cup that keeps getting refilled, right?
Absolutely. That's right.
I love the idea of a puzzle. What a great way to bring people together. We do, in our office, we do team builders on a monthly basis. And, it's that relationship building, and that's very structured, but it's something that we commit to in our office culture to do above and beyond the informal conversations and the lunches. And, we've just scheduled or are in the process of scheduling another staff lunch where we're going to bring a potluck in on a Friday before the holidays. So, it's finding new and different ways, to Leonard's point, to meet people where they are. And the puzzle works for you and this particular teacher, but you had to get to know her a little bit, or her, before you knew that was what was going to be the connection. So again, it's that people-centered approach. Wonderful. We had a couple of other questions pop in. Oh, actually a few questions here. Kevin is asking, how do teachers respond when they do not get the consequences they are seeking? And more specifically, are you seeing changes in attitudes as you continue your restorative work? So Dawn, do you want to dive into that one? And then we'll ask Leonard the same. Dawn, you're on mute. I do that all the time.
Am I on? Okay. I'm on now. Okay, sorry. That's a great question. I have not had. It's an interesting thing because I'm because I'm developing my my mindset and my skill in terms of being more restorative with my teachers. I have not had that difficulty in terms of the teacher having an expectation of a consequence that must be leveled against a student in a circumstance, whereas in the past I have had that. I don't know how we've come to this place, but on Sunday in my Life Space Crisis Intervention course, we have a Zoom every Sunday morning, and I was talking to my classmates about this, and I have found that when it comes to consequences, because as Leonard said, now the student and I work together to try to get through, to come to a consensus about what is going to happen next. And then once I finish working with the student, I go to the teacher and I work very closely with them. I don't cut them out of the loop. There's an article that we read early in our studies called Conflict as Property, and how, in our current society, someone complains of a harm, and once they've given their testimony, they're cut out of the entire process, and it is taken from them. The harm is taken from them. And so I make it my business to involve the teachers in the conversation about not only about consequences, but about the most restorative way we can deal with situations. And I haven't had nearly as much pushback. So when we're talking about the idea of restorative practice, some people are still not sure what it is, but when they see it in action, it really does change their, even their approach and even what they're asking for in terms of reparations for a harm that it might have been done in class.
Great, thank you. Leonard, do you have anything to add?
Sure. Good question, Kevin. So one of the first things that one of the foundational principles that I kind of drill into everybody in the school is this: hurt people hurt people. And so when something like that comes up, which doesn't happen very often now, basically what the teacher is saying is that I want to see this student hurt, which tells me that the teacher's hurt. So usually in that case, what I can do is sit down with the teacher, and if necessary, I'll just do a conference between the teacher and the student and have both of them talk about how they hurt each other, or not how they hurt each other, or how the other person hurt them. And usually that resolves the conflict, because normally what happens is yes, hurt people, but they're not consciously hurting other people. They're hurting other people because they're hurting. If I have a student in front of me who has hurt someone else, I know that that student is hurting. And now it's become such a mantra that now when the student sits down, I just basically look at him and say, okay, what's going on? Because you're hurting other people. What's going on with you that you're hurting other people? And usually when I can get them to talk about the hurt, it kind of like takes the air out of the balloon. And when I send the child back to class, it's a different student. I have a lot of conversations with administrators, and the first thing I tell them is that if this student is hurting and they're acting out, then that means there's something inside of them that's hurting. And we have the idea that by hurting them more, that's going to make them change the behavior. And all it's going to do is just actually make the behavior worse, or around about junior high school, they figure out how not to get caught. But if that hurt is inside, they're going to continue to act out on the behavior, and they're not doing it consciously. So what we work on is helping the student to get in touch with the hurt. Because once they get in touch with the hurt, it kind of lets the air out of it. My mom didn't come home last night. My little sister broke her leg. These things, these kids bring to school, and it comes out in their behavior. But if we don't give them the opportunity to express it, it just builds and builds and builds and builds and builds. And then there's a question in the chat that says, how can teachers apply restorative practices in helping emotionally disturbed students? So when we talk about emotionally disturbed, this is what I know. I don't care what their problem is, they still feel. And what restorative practices is about addressing the affect. So emotionally disturbed or not, we just want to find out what's hurting them. And once we know what's hurting them, we can kind of address that. And then once they're able to do that, then they don't really have the need to hurt other kids. So I don't think it has anything to do with the intellectual level of a human being. Unless they're a sociopath, restorative practices will work. So I hope that helps.
Thank you. Dawn, do you have anything to add about the question that came up in chat? I know you mentioned earlier the population of students that you're working with.
Would you please repeat that question?
Sure. How can teachers apply restorative practices in helping emotionally disturbed students. So what has your experience been with there?
So, well, one of the things that we do is first we have to triage, because if there's a mental health issue, that has primacy. That is the first thing that we have to do, is really make sure that we're providing that child with the resources that they need for treatment. Because one of the things that I've learned is, if the student is not fully able to participate in a restorative practice, it's not helpful. It's not helpful to them. So that is the very first thing that we do. But then after that is teaching and training. So we're spending time in all of these interactions, and it takes time and it takes patience. It takes hope and belief that people can and will change. And we pour in time and time again. I'm thinking of a student who is relatively new to the country, and he has a very difficult time being a good friend. And so he finds himself in difficulty with the people around him. And so now, rather than dealing with him punitively, when he finds himself in trouble, we repair the harm, and then he comes separately and we talk about how to be a good friend. What happened in the interaction that would make it difficult for someone to be friends with him. So we begin to really work with the student. Once we have all of the physical and mental health issues cared for, then we can go in and we can begin to train how to have productive relationships, how to be a productive person, to be someone that can be supportive to someone else. It has really changed him. This has really changed him. When I see him during dismissal, even, he's happy. The other day he was leaving school, and I just called his name and I waved to him, and he was with his mother, and he stopped and he came back to me. Whereas when we first met and I was first, and I'm learning so much, the only way he could think about me was as someone who was going to hurt him more. And now that we do work, and we sit and we talk and we process and we role play how to be a good friend and how to have good friends, he's a different boy. He's a different boy, not just with me, but even in his classes.
And I imagine he takes that home to his family as well.
Yes, and it does work. It is an interesting thing when parents then call and say, so my child was talking about this structured playtime. I have structured playtime in my office, where I teach children how to play with each other. And the parents want to know more about what happens during this time, and why is their child getting into fewer fights with their siblings at home. It's very, very interesting to watch it unfold.
That's amazing. That's wonderful. Thank you for sharing. We have several questions that popped up. I want to try to be respectful of time. We have time yet. And I'm going to try to summarize some of the questions. And I think, Leonard, I'd like to ask you this one first, because you and I had a conversation about this on Thursday. So, Cindy, thank you for writing in. Some of your question is a little bit deeper than I think we can go into here, but I'd like to ask you to send your email contact information to me in a Q&A so I can get back to you, because I'd like to connect the deeper part of the conversation. I'd like to connect you with one of our faculty members to have that discussion. What I'd like Leonard to talk about, if you don't mind, Cindy wrote, it takes time to be restorative. and invest in others, sitting together and getting to know each other. What are ways to practice restorative practice in my own life? Like Leonard mentioned, it's an experiential practice. And Leonard, I'm thinking about the conversation we had last Thursday about we don't remember what we didn't know when we started, and we started to learn, and we go to trainings and we get the cards or we get the books, but how do you build that experience? What was that like for you?
So the thing about restorative practices is that it's much larger than any of us can possibly imagine. And the reason is that when we talk about paradigms, it is literally the way we see the world. And you can't see what you cannot see. So the process of restorative practices has been just kind of getting a glimpse of this new world, and then you come back, and getting a little bit more of a glimpse, and then you come back. What I have found is that process, that growth, Dawn talked about it. I could hear the joy in her voice as she talks about watching this kid transform. Well, that's a glimpse of the restorative world. But then she goes to get in her car, and it's like, boom, here we are back in, but that builds. The way to shortcut that is to participate in as many actual restorative practices. When we do a restorative practice, we are entering a different world. So go home tonight and get all your family in a circle and get a talking piece out and have everyone share their truth. Or when it comes to one-on-one conversations, start your conversation with hey, what's going on? And then just shut up and listen. And what happens in that moment is I'm actually making that connection with another person from where they live. I think that a lot of times we think that restorative practice is something that we learn out of the book, and in the beginning, when you look at the IIRP and those concepts that we talked about, they're pretty simplistic, and you're kind of like, is this all there is to it? And yes, that is all there is to it until we start to practice it. Another huge one is fair process. If you actually do fair process, you will be astounded at the response of the person who you are quote unquote punishing, because you're not punishing them anymore. You're doing it with them. So these are little things that the more we build them into our life, the more restorative we become. Well, here's something I tell all the teachers that I work with. You're going to vacillate between punitive, permissive, down into the not, punitive, permissive. And then all of a sudden, you're going to slip into restorative, but you're not going to be quite sure what it is that you did. But here's how you know you're being restorative. It feels good. Just your heart, it's just going to be like, oh, wow, that felt pretty good. That's how you know you're being restorative, because that connection is happening with another human being. This is the same speech I give all day long, every day. You just got to kind of get in there and do it. The best place to start is right at home. If you have kids, the next time before you yell at your kids, stop and ask them, get that card out. Use that card. Do the things, do the circles they say in that book. Because I got news for you folks. I've been doing this for a little while. If you're not doing restorative practices, your learning curve is going to be very long, and you may never get there. I know people who have been reading and talking about restorative practices for years who still haven't quite gotten it because they haven't invested in the actual practice. Thanks.
Thank you, Leonard. Dawn, would you like to comment?
Yes. Everything that Leonard just said, everything. And I'd like to add just one thing. I'm taking the World Conference course. And so I watched an interview with Cassidy Friedman from the Toronto conference, and he said that he had the good fortune to grow up with parents, and this was the thing that different thing. I was listening to Leonard, and it brought Cassidy to mind. Cassidy said that in his home, his family would ask him, "How are you?" And then, how are you really? And that when we get to take that time, I like the way Cindy phrased her question, time and investment. when I invest the time to not just ask, how are you? I'm on my way to something else, but how are you really? That changes, it changes the interaction. It changes the air between two people. I would argue that has been the biggest shift for me in terms of my restorative practice. In addition to understanding that restorative practice is not a bunch of tips and strategies, it is a way of being. It is who you are, and it is who you are becoming. And so when I'm taking that time when students are coming in the morning and I ask them, how are you? And then I stop and look directly at them. And all the other 999 other kids are doing whatever, but I'm looking at that one child. I've taken the time to invest and get that answer, and I'll get that time back later.
Absolutely. And again, people first. I keep hearing that theme. People first. The tasks will be there. They're not going to go anywhere. The work isn't going to go anywhere. But that initial investment with the individual, you're right, Dawn. You get paid back. You get that time back tenfold because you're spending the time. I don't work with students. I don't work in a K through 12 school. I work in an office, and to your point, Dawn, about really, both of your points, to really focusing, one thing that it's intentional, right? We have to remind ourselves it's very easy to slip back and become complacent and say, oh, I got this. The relationship's built. We're good. I can go on to the next thing. It's maintaining that intentionality. From my experience, that really is challenging because it is so easy to pull the hammer out. It is so easy to just say, really? Do I have to talk about this again? Instead of saying, wait a minute, what stopped you from being successful? What stopped you from doing this? Or what caused this? Or what were you thinking? So really getting to the root of it. One of the things that I started a while ago, when staff or colleagues came to talk with me, I always had my computer. I have a laptop. I had my computer up, and I would just turn to look at them, but I'm visual, so there's always something on my computer screen, and I intentionally shut my computer screen down and close the laptop and say, how can I help you? One small motion where my focus is completely on that individual. And again, I'm working with adults, but it's the same. I think, a lot of folks that I talk with will see our professional development events and they'll read the books, and the handbook says for teachers, disciplinarians. I'm not a teacher. I'm not a disciplinarian. I don't work in a school. I never have. But what I've learned from our events and our courses, I'm implementing right away at work as well. And I'm working with adults. I'm working with adult students. I'm working with adult colleagues. The challenges are the same, right? The need is the same. It's the relationship. It's when you're talking about the cards, for anyone who isn't familiar, we have restorative question cards. They're available in our bookstore, but one side has questions for the person who caused the harm. One side has questions for the person that's been harmed. And they're great resources when you're first just starting to learn and, go through. It is kind of going through the motions initially, following the scripts until it becomes part of your norm. And it's just, my experience is it's trial, and it's just repetition and not deviating from what the goal is, which is the person and the relationship. We have one more question. I think we may have answered the one. Christina asked about what other suggestions do you have for administrators to be restorative with staff. I think we've gotten to that a couple different times, but Christina, if you have specific questions or follow-ups, please feel free to type in, because I want to make sure that you're getting what you need. We had one question about whether your schools are using PBIS strategies in addition to the restorative practices. So if you want to take a minute or two just to touch on that, that would be helpful.
So we do have a PBIS program that, but at the same time, we're trying to develop the restorative practices in our building, but we do, and they do run side by side, the two programs. But right now we're just in the fledgling stages of having a full-on restorative school.
Thank you. Leonard, and there's a question, what is PBIS? I believe it's, let's see if I have this one right. Positive Behavioral Intervention?
Mm-hmm.
You're both on mute.
Oh. Yeah, strategies.
Strategies, there we go.
It's, basically, techniques for teachers to run their classroom is what it kind of comes down to. Yes, some of the teachers use PBIS. You know, things like PBIS. It's kind of an individual choice. I know I've seen a lot of PBIS trainings. I don't see very much PBIS in the classrooms. It's kind of one of those types of things. What I have noticed, and what I do tell the teachers that I work with is that this is about you becoming restorative. You know, I have a saying: it's not my job to manage your relationships. And if your relationship with your students are strained, it's probably because you probably need to work on some stuff. But PBIS is a great tool because it has strategies to deal with and to create norms in your classroom. Although my suggestion always is just to kind of have, if I'm working on becoming restorative, anything will work. You see, because restorative becomes the frame and the relationship becomes more important. And if I have good relationships with people, it doesn't matter what technique I use. But, you know, from the school point of view and for teachers like things to be nice and neat and tidy and, you know, so if that works for you, yes, but just focus on having good relationships with your kids, you know, and if you need help doing that, ask somebody, what do I need to do to have better relationship with these, you know, someone who knows restorative practices. And you'll get better. That's the thing. Just, you know, a little bit at a time. I'll say this and shut up. I have a saying: anything we do is better than what we've been doing. So there's no way to mess this up. Okay.
Thank you. I will. I'll just add one piece to the PBIS. I personally am not familiar with it, but I also know that there are we do a lot of work in schools across the United States. And I know that there's a lot of schools that are using PBIS, and we don't see this as an either or, like Leonard was saying and Dawn was saying. It's a combination because both are important and both are valuable. So our instructors, when they're out in the schools, offering events at the schools on property, are integrating, are helping, you know, the staff integrate. It's not just PBIS and it's not just restorative practices, but they both are relevant and they both play together nicely to help develop those relationships and those positive outcomes. So I hope that's helpful for the person that asked. One more question. If anybody else has questions, feel free to type them in as we get closer to the end of our hour together. But I am curious, Dawn, I'll ask you first. What was the deciding factor for you to take the dive into another education? I know you are never ending with your education. What was the deciding factor for you to say, yes, I want to learn more, but I really want to go all the way for a degree?
I feel as if my studies with IIRP have opened up a whole new world for me. Right now I'm trying to develop, years ago a professor told me that anyone who desires to pursue the doctoral level study should have a bulletproof question that they are willing to be married to, because you're going to be with it for a long time. And through my studies and so all of these years I've held back because I haven't had any questions that met both of those criteria. One, bulletproof. Two, something I would be willing to live with for a very long time. in the year and a half I've been at IIRP, I now have 5 bulletproof questions. And now the difficulty is choosing just one, because the study is so rich, and I am growing personally as well as professionally at the same time. And it's very difficult in moments, just like any growing pains, but I'm enjoying it so much. I don't even have words. I'm so interested. I'm so excited about what I'm learning that this semester, we were talking a little earlier, I've taken between September and January, I will have taken 5 classes because I'm just reawakened. And my belief in my work has been reinvigorated. And now I'm just ready to go all the way with this program.
Thank you, Dawn. Leonard?
Thank you for that, Dawn. Yeah. It's kind of like that story of mining for gold, and all of a sudden you find this vein, and you become, I want to use the word obsessed, but it's not quite an obsession, because this doesn't feel good all the time, okay? So it's a process. But I've always been a helper. I've always wanted to help people. And to be honest with you, right about the time I came across restorative practices, I was pretty much jaded, disillusioned, and ready to give up. I was just like, and so when I came across restorative practices and a couple of other events that happened in my life, I knew that this was it. So I pursued it on my own. I went to all kinds of trainings, things like that. And so I was more, and I still am more interested in the field work. I wasn't really interested in the academic aspect of it. When I came across IIRP, I realized that that they had what I needed as far as the academic and the structural part of it. So it wasn't so much as a decision for me to further my career. It was almost like, this is what you have to do. So I kind of came at it from the other way around, which is interesting because I really didn't have any desire to go forward in my. As a matter of fact, I applied to get a degree in social work, to work on my master's in social work, and I resigned because I'm like, I can't do this. I can't stuff my head with another 4 years of this stuff. So I just decided, you know what, I'm not going to go any further until I came across restorative practices. And it's just been a wonderful journey since then, nonstop. I've never looked back. Yeah. So, I hope that answers the question.
Thank you. It does. It does. The commitment, the dedication, it's so clear and so evident with both of you. So thank you. I want to be respectful of time. Desiree, I have your question. I am going to ask you for your email, so I'll send you a message while we're doing our close and go around. I do have somebody to connect you with specifically who can talk about the higher ed college setting. So just keep an eye on the Q&A, and if you can respond with your email, that'd be great. I can definitely get you connected with someone. Dawn, Leonard, as we get close to 7 o'clock, just a final checkout or go around, one thing that you'd like to share, one piece of information or something that you think is really important for our guests to know.
I'll jump in. This really is a way of life, and it really can change everything. It has changed how I interact at home with my spouse, with my siblings. It has changed the way I am at work. It is a life shift, and I'm very, very grateful for this opportunity.
Thank you. Leonard? Leonard, you're on mute.
I did it. So my suggestion is to do as many restorative practices as you possibly can. And what a restorative practice is it's a circle, it's a conference, it's a dialogue, it's another thing that we call a chat or a family group conference. And I suggest that you read the material and follow the format as much as you possibly can. Learn how to ask effective questions and also how to make effective statements and practice it. And just focus on having good relationships with people. Once you get the first piece of it and you kind of get a taste of it, the rest will kind of, you'll begin to go in that direction. But this is really about practical application. Do as many as you possibly can. Log in hours. I have a log. I logged my hours. I have over 1,000 hours in restorative practices. Log those hours and just go out there and do it, because here's the cool part about it. Restorative practices isn't done in a vacuum. So every one of those practices that you're doing it with another human being, and you're helping them heal, even when they don't know it.
Thank you. I just want to take a minute and share some of the feedback that we're getting through chat. I don't know if Dawn and Leonard, you're seeing this, but thank you to everybody who's commented and participated with the questions. Some folks are saying this has been powerful. Thank you for the wisdom and experiences. You bring a wealth of information and you bring so much to the work. Thank you for sharing the time and the knowledge with us. And I can't thank you enough. I really enjoyed the time that we spent together. I enjoyed learning from both of you tonight. And Leonard, consistently for the next week while we finish up our course together. If anyone has any questions, I am always available. I put my email into the chat feature. Feel free to email me. My words of wisdom, if you will, keep learning. Whatever that looks like for you, keep learning. That may be joining another webinar when we offer it. That may be going to our bookstore and buying the book or buying the question cards and just try it. That might be coming to one of our professional development events, and it might be diving into the graduate courses. Take it at the pace that's best for you, but you're here and you've spent an hour with us for a reason. You're clearly interested in learning more. You clearly want to make a difference in the community that you're serving. So keep learning. And however I can support you in that journey, I'm here to do that. So feel free to reach out to me. Thank you everyone for joining. Have a great night. Dawn and Leonard, thank you again for joining tonight.
Thank you. Peace and blessings.
Take care.